Garden. Firstly, I welcome Dr. Biju George for delivering his talk. So,
yeah, I'll share my presentation.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, sir. You're visible and audible.
Okay, so shall I start?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so first session I'll be taking about ethical issues in biomedical research. What do you mean by an ethics? Ethics is nothing but a moral code of conduct, which basically define what is wrong or what is right when you are living in a society. So there is always a societal perspective to this ethics. So society basically decide what is right and what is wrong. So ethics also examine how we make that choices, because every day when we live in society, we make certain choices, we make certain decisions, we do certain activities, and how do we make the decision about certain activity, and how do we make the right decision and the wrong decisions, and what prompts us to do this right and wrong decision. These are all part of the ethics. Now, when you talk about ethics, there are three broad areas of ethics. One is called as a practice ethics or the clinical ethics, which basically deals with the interactions between participants, patients, and the clinicians, the practitioner. The second one is the research ethics, which is between the researcher and the corresponding research participants. And third one is the public health ethics, which basically is between public health administrator, and the community, in which the public health administrator do certain action on the community, and how the community gets affected. Now, why we do talk about all these ethics is because there are a lot of clinical research ethics and publication ethics issue, which are associated with each of these three areas or three dimensions. Let us look at an example in each of these areas. Let us try to understand that in each area there are a lot of dimensions, ethical dimensions. So let us look at a clinical scenario. Suppose a patient get admitted after a road traffic accidents with polytrauma. Now, because there is a polytrauma, there are a lot of fracture and other things. Orthopedicians or maybe the surgeons, they did a surgery. And the patient is still unconscious. Even after the surgery, the patient is still unconscious. Now, since there is a polytrauma, a lot of blood has been lost. So the treating team, the orthopedician or the surgeon, they decided that the patient need a blood transfusion on an emergency basis. Naturally, when they need a blood transfusion, they will intimate this to the relatives and ask them to go to the blood bank, collect blood, and they will ask the relatives to donate blood also. But the relatives, when they received this news, they said, no, we don't want blood to be transfused to this particular our relative. Now, why? Because it is against their belief. Now, there is a sect among the Christians called as a Jehovah Witness. According to their belief, another person's body part should not be taken, which means you cannot have organ transplantation, you cannot have blood transfusions for this. So now just think, suppose you are the part of that treating team, how will you proceed further? What will you do? Remember, the patient is unconscious, so you cannot ask the patient. So who will make the decision on behalf of the patient? So that's the question. Can somebody either unmute or just put in the chat box what you'll do? If you are a part of a treating physician, what you will do? Will you agree with the relatives and not transfuse the blood? Or will you move against their will and transfuse the blood? Anybody? So what is the dimension here? What is the problem here? Problem here is who make the decision about their health? Basically, that patient is the ultimate authority to make a decision about his or her health, which later on we will call it as an autonomy. Autonomy. So the person has to make a decision about his or her health. Now, this person is unconscious. So, who is the rightful legal person, legal representative who can make this decision? Is it the relatives? Maybe. Is it the doctors who make the decision so that the patient will get better? So there is no clear-cut answer. Maybe the doctor can talk with the relatives and discuss the seriousness of this issue and convince them that without a blood transfusion, the person may die. Maybe the doctors can think about transfusing other than blood, like volume expanders, etc., and deal with it, maybe. So whatever you do, there is certain amount of infringement on autonomy. Whether you transfuse, whether you not transfuse, there is certain amount of infringement on autonomy, and there is some kind of ethical dimensions to this. So there is no clear-cut guideline which says that you should definitely do something like this or you should do in the other manner, etc. It is not like that. Depending upon the situation, you should act. But there is certain amount of ethical dimension. Now let us look at another scenario, a research scenario. Now, the study aims to find out the prevalence of sexual abuse among high school girl students. The researcher, they plan to collect the data by doing an in-depth interview. Qualitative research, they are planning to do in-depth interview of the participants will be done and they'll collect the data. Now, actually, there are two issues here. Two issues. One, some kind of a legal and ethical plus a legal conflict issue is there. And there is an another ethical concern is there. Now, remember, this is a high school student. That means less than 18 years. As per Indian law, any sexual abuse of under 18 girl children or underage children, if you came to know about it, you should intimate that to the police, POSCO Act, under the POSCO Act. So which means, if you came to know about the sexual abuse, you should immediately inform the police. But then what is the problem there? It's a legal thing, but problem is when you take the consent for the participant, you give an assurance to the participant that whatever data that you collect will be kept confidential and it will not be divulged. That is a agreement that you make in your consent. Now, so there become the conflict. When you give a consent, you are saying that you will keep the data confidential, you will not divulge to other persons. But according to legal framework, you are supposed to divulge this to the police. Now, in a court of law, even if you divulge, the court doesn't consider it as a breach or doesn't consider it as a breach of confidentiality because there's a legal system which prevails over this. So that's a legal versus an ethical concern conflict there. But there is a genuine ethical concern also here. Maybe the girl had a sexual abuse, maybe 2 years or 3 years back. She has recovered from the mental trauma and she is at present peaceful. But now you jump into the situation and you start asking about a lot of sexual abuse history. And when you do the in-depth interview, you are asking a lot of probing questions, in-depth questions. And to answer your question, she has to remember her previous experience, previous incident. And she started remembering all those incidents which she had tried to forget or which she had eliminated from her mind somehow. Now, a physical wound will heal. Same way, a mental wound, a psychiatric wound, that's also healed to some extent. But now, because you have asked about all these things in the in-depth interview, that wound, mental wound, get opened up. So that may produce a severe mental trauma to that figure. So she may go in for depression. She may commit a suicide. So there is a genuine ethical concern. When an ethics committee look at this protocol, there's a genuine concern by the ethics committee that this may be more damaging to that girl child than whatever extra information generated from the study that will produce a benefit to the society. So there is always a concern to the ethics committee, should we approve it because there may be some benefit to the society because knowledge about sexual abuse and how it occurs, that knowledge can be used to prevent further sexual abuse among the minor. But there is also concern that by allowing the study, some of the girl children may end up in depression and other things, etc. And that may badly affect the whole. So there's always a genuine ethical dilemma for the researcher, genuine ethical dilemma for the researcher. Sometimes when the child goes into suicide, the researcher will feel very bad also. The researcher will go into depression that because I asked this question, probing question, that is why that girl commits suicide. And the researcher now going for a depression. So that creates a lot of issues. Now, the third area that I mentioned was public health. If you remember, Kerala government and all over the country, India, we were having some kind of a measles elimination campaign, where students in the school, they were given measles rubella vaccination, MR vaccine. Now, but lot of parents or lot of social groups, when the government put on that project, they say that this is against the autonomy, because the government just put an order that every student studying in the school, whether it's a government or a private, should get measles rubella vaccination. They didn't ask for the consent. So a lot of groups said that this is against the consent because it's a minor children. So you need not only the student's consent, but you also need the consent of the legal guardian, the parents. So that was the consent. And then later on, government actually put on a something called not a consent letter, but they put a order saying that if the parents don't want to take that MR vaccination, they should send a letter to the school saying that I don't want my child to get immunized, and this is my statement, etc. Okay. So that's actually an opposite to the consent, which they are not saying that I want the vaccination, I am ready to take the vaccine. Instead, they are saying that we don't want to take the vaccination. Now, the government argued against this autonomy of the individual persons by the argument called as a utilitarian theory, which is a very commonly used theory in ethical argument. And utilitarian theory basically says that the greater good for more number of people would be better. That basically means if you give MR vaccination to all of the children, measles rubella will get eliminated from the future population, and all of the people, all of the future populations would benefit. Not only the present population, but the future population also benefit. So even though you are against autonomy of the individual participants, even if you are denying autonomy to individual participant, you are still getting a benefit. That would be the argument of the government. But the individual people, they will be saying that autonomy is more important than the utilitarian. Now let us look into a few historical aspects of these ethical aspects. The first thing started with Hippocrates' oath, and then the major change occurred in the Nuremberg Court. And then remember in 1964, we have World Medical Association Declaration of Helsinki and 1979 Belmont Report. And in India, we have a lot of our own policy statements in 1980, then guidelines in 2000, 2006, 2017, etc. Now, Hippocrates' oath was one of the oldest modern medicine oath in the medical ethics. These were the things which were recommended by the original Hippocrates oath, but this is not talked about in the present or the modified Hippocrates. But all other things are there in the Hippocrates. But talking about this ethics, generally we talk in terms of the Second World War and atrocities done by the Germans. One of the example of the atrocities done by the Germans was a freezing experiment. What the German scientists did was very simple. They put people in ice cold, that means 0 degrees centigrade water. They then looked at how much is the reduction, the respiratory rate, what would be the reduction in BP, what would be the reduction in heart rate, what will happen to the ECG. They looked at how fast the person developed hypothermia. They looked at how fast the person developed perfusion defect, how fast the person developed cyanosis, dies, and etc. Now, the intention was very, 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 very high, when you can say. They want to know if somebody falls in an ice cold water in the sea, especially the North Sea, northern sea close to the northern pole, then how many hours they will survive in that ice cold water? Because many of the pilots, German pilots, had some breaks in the plane and they fall down in the sea. And before a German can send a boat to save them, they die. So they want to know how fast the death occur, what would be the symptoms, etc. So they did a lot of freezing experiments with a lot of participants. They did a lot of other experiments. For example, they did a bone regeneration. They will break the bone, like they will break femur and see how fast it will regenerate and reunite. They will cut down the spinal cord and see whether the spinal cord nerves will regenerate, etc. They did a lot of experiments. But what is the problem? The participants, none of the participants were the so-called Germans. All these participants were either Jews, Russian, Poles, Gypsies, mentally retarded, and other people who were kept captive by the German army, either prisoners of the war or the migrants and other people who were put in the asylums, etc., run by the German army. Now, at the end of the World War II, all these German soldiers were put under the trials, legal trials. Similarly, all the doctors and the medical researchers who have done research, unethical research, they were also tried. They are also under the legal trial. At the end of the trial team put forward a code of conduct for the researchers to be followed in the future. And this is later on known as the Nuremberg Code. And the 10 principles put down by the Nuremberg Code is still valid. Voluntary consent, scientific benefit outweighs the risk, animal experiments first, avoid suffering, no unintentional death or disability, protection from harm, subject free to stop, qualified investigators will stop if harm occurs, etc. These are 10 principles which are still being followed. Now, the people in the US, etc., they were thinking that Germans were very cruel people, that is why they were doing. But US and other people were also doing the similar kind of unethical experiment. For example, in US, they were doing experiments with radioactive materials. They injected uranium, plutonium, polonium, etc. into live subject without taking consent, without telling them, and they want to know how the metabolic activities will stop and cease, etc. They have done experiments on mentally challenged children by inoculating them with hepatitis either in the food or by giving injections, and see how the hepatitis infection spread within that particular person, within the community, etc. All intentionally introduced infection. In 1964, World Medical Association put a document called as a Helsinki Declaration, which talks about what are the ethical conditions that should be followed when you are doing a medical research. And it is modified many times, and the latest modification is in the 2013. 1966, one researcher published an article called as Ethics in Clinical Research. He collected other articles which were published in major journals in the Europe and America at that time. He collected some 15-20 articles, and these articles contain major ethical violations. And he argued that researchers are blinded by the thirst for the knowledge, thirst for the because of their intention, they blind the researcher and they are blinded to the ethical violation they do. Because of this article, a lot of talks about ethical violations occur in the US, and ethics committee were set up, were implemented as a result of this. Another major occurrence during that time period was the Tuskegee study. The Tuskegee study started as a study for the natural history of the syphilis in 1930. All the subjects were blacks. Problem was, by 1948, penicillin was found to be effective as a curative agent for syphilis. And then the agency, the public health agency which done the experiment, they discussed about this. Then they thought, we will not discuss the effect of syphilis, effect of penicillin on the syphilis to the participant, because if we told them, then they will take treatment, then we cannot study the natural risk. Then they went on with the study. Somewhere in 1972, a newspaper reporter came to know about this. She put a report in the New York Times, and that produced a huge uproar in the US Senate. The Senate appointed a committee, and that committee report was later on known as the Belmont Report. And that committee report came in 1979, which prescribed 3 basic or 4 pillars in the ethics: justice, autonomy, beneficence, and the 4th pillar may be called the non-maleficence. Now, autonomy is basically a respect for the person, respect individual differences, cultural difference, protect vulnerable groups, confidentiality, informed consent, etc. All come as a part of the respect. Beneficence, do good. Remember, every research may have some benefit, may have some risk. The benefit should outweigh the risk. Maximization of benefit is key in research. Justice, fair distribution of benefit and risk. Remember the research done in Germans, by the Germans, all the risk is on the war, prisoners of the war. And whatever benefit would have been there, it would have been to the Germans only. So it is not a fair distribution of benefit and risk. So that's not an acceptable thing many often. Non-maleficence, do no harm, minimize harm to the participants. Now, in India, also we have strong ethical guidelines. The current ethical guideline is that of 2017 guideline, which is called as a National Ethical Guideline for Biomedical Health Research involving human participants. You can go to the ICMR website and you can get the full report. Now, ICMR guideline talks about 12 principles. Now, I'll just ask you to look at 2 principles. One is social responsibility and environmental protection, which you don't see in many of the other guidelines in the world. So our guidelines are sometimes called as good as any international guideline, or maybe much superior than the international guideline in North. So when you do a research, you need to take consent. So remember, it's an informed voluntary consent. And for that informed voluntary consent, what you give is informed consent document. And it has 2 parts. One is called the patient information sheet and informed consent form. And remember, the informed consent document should talk about aims of the study, methods, duration, benefits, and risks to the participant, what are the alternative for the participant, their freedom to withdraw, how will you keep the confidentiality, will you give free treatment for injury, will you give compensation if it's a trial, etc. And what are the responsibilities of investigator, how will you contact the research team, how will you contact the ethics committee, and whether there is any future use of data, etc. These all things should be mentioned in the informed consent order. Remember, I also told you about the researcher themselves cannot make a good judgment about the ethical violation. That is why the institutional ethics committees are created. Now, ethics committee has two roles. One is to protect the participants. Second is to protect the researcher. So, as a researcher, you should remember the ethics committee duty is not only to protect participants, but it is also to protect the researcher also. And ethics committee should be independent. There are three major groups of people. One group is a scientific people like clinician, pharmacologists, etc. For protection of participants, you have lay person, social worker, theologist, etc. For legal side, you have a legal experts. Now, most of the ethics committee, according to the ICMR guideline, you should have 7 to 15 members, and the quorum is generally set to have 5 members minimum. And these are the 7 groups of members. Chairperson, which is not affiliated to institution, member secretary, which is affiliated to institution, basic medical scientist should be a pharmacologist if the ethics committee look to or non-affiliated, legal experts, social scientists, person who is not affiliated to institution. And ethics committee do different types of review. Full review is the traditional review. The whole ethics committee members sit together, discuss the protocol, make the decision. Expedited review means these already accepted protocol, if they are modified very slightly, not change in the objective, some minor modification in the methodology, then you need not go to a full ethics committee meeting. A subcommittee can look into a protocol and approve. Or it may be in a disaster situation, or just research involved record review without identifying details. Exempt review is there. Exempt review is basically decided by the member secretary, and classical example is ethics committee approval for the meta-analysis. There is no direct patient information regarding in this particular. Now, the ethics committee can make a decision about rejecting the protocol, but when you reject, you should give specific reason why you reject. They can also suggest major modification. Then in their letter, they should specifically say what are the corrections needed, modification needed. It may suggest minor modification or it may suggest accept. Now remember, all studies have harm and benefit. As a researcher, you should know what are the possible benefits of the study. You should know what are the possible harms. And you should ensure measures to reduce the harm. And you should explain it in the protocol, what are the measures you will ensure to reduce the harm. And you should be concerned about the benefit to harm ratio. If you are writing an article and trying to publish in Indian journal, talk about the ICMR guideline. If you are thinking about publishing an article in the international journal, talking about the Helsinki Declaration. Remember about the three key ethical principles: autonomy, justice, beneficence, and non-maleficence. And remember, ethics committee is for protection of the participant and for the researchers, and informed consent is very much essential for any kind of a research. I think that's all. If you have some queries, I can address the query. Either you can unmute and ask, or you can put it in the chat box also.
Dr. Biju, there are no queries now. Probably it will be asked in the end of the session.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Dr. Biju. And currently, Dr. Biju is the associate professor in the Department of Community Medicine, Government College, Kottayam. And he's a member of many ethics committees. And actually, he's the apt person to deliver this talk. And it was a very good talk, sir. Thank you. Next, I welcome Dr. Feroz Kaliadan to deliver his talk. Dr. Feroz is a professor of dermatology at SNIMS Kochi. Dr. Feroz.
Good evening, everyone. Hope I'm audible and the screen is clear.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right. So I think first of all, thank you, Dr. Biju, for that wonderful talk. Very lucid and well explained. And I hope that the PGs understand the usefulness of his talk. I think there is something on the chat. No. Okay. So I'll be just briefly talking about citations, which is something very important when you write your thesis, which is not often a very enjoyable thing to do. At least it wasn't for us. Now, when you write a thesis, especially your review of literature, often you will find statements which people might raise queries about. So they might feel that, is that really a correct statement? Where did you get it from? And all those things. So that is where the importance of citations come, because otherwise, if you are not sure of your source, it becomes a bit like the Chinese whisper. Okay. So originally somebody would have tried to say something, but as it gets passed on, copy paste, it turns into some other story completely. So if the person reading your thesis needs to verify what you're talking about, they need to go to the original source. How do they find the original source? They need to have a citation. You need to be, you need to put something over there which can take the reader to the original source where you got it from, and they can verify it on their own. So that is one importance of citations. By definition, the citation is a reference to a book, paper, author, website, etc. in a scholarly work. The second part of the story is that, whenever you cite something, so suppose some paper mentions that, PRP is more effective than a certain drug in androgenic alopecia, example, it is not enough to, just copy paste the words verbatim into your thesis or into your review literature or any work that you're doing, scientific work that you're doing. You need to put it in your own words. And that concept of putting into your own words is called paraphrasing. So paraphrase, but at the same time, you also need to cite the original source. So one is to enable others to trace out your sources, study them in detail as needed. And number two is to acknowledge the work of others and to avoid plagiarism. Now, just take a look at this. So this is the original statement in a particular article. So it says that X-linked dominant chondrodysplasia punctata is an inheritable systemic disease and is characterized by skeletal ophthalmic and cutaneous manifestations. Now, what I'm trying to say is that you cannot just copy paste this directly into your work. So you need to change it a bit. This is the reference for that particular statement. And here you can see that it is essentially the same message, but it's not exactly the same words. So this is what we call as paraphrasing. So, however, nowadays, the plagiarism software, they pick up plagiarism even when the paraphrasing is not that very good. So, you need to be a bit careful with paraphrasing also, because just a few words changed here and there can still be picked up by plagiarism software. So a good idea is that, whatever work you do, especially the review of literature part, make sure that you get it checked through a plagiarism software and you check which areas are looking similar so that you can correct those. And there are many tools available now for paraphrasing. Quillbot and Referenwrite are two things you can try. I'm sure there are a lot of others, but of course, if you can do it on your own, well and good, but it's a good idea to just try out these tools. They're quite useful. One thing which we need not paraphrase is quotations. So obviously a quotation is a quotation, so you need to put it as such. But then remember that even for quotations, you need to cite the source from where you took the quotation. For example, this is a famous quotation by Abraham Lincoln. It says that, for once in my life as president, I find myself in a position to give everybody something. It's not enough to just put it as, Abraham Lincoln put this. In an ideal situation, you also need to mention where you got this quote from. So even quotations need to be cited regarding the source. Okay. But of course, paraphrasing is not required. You can put it verbatim as such. And like I said, always do a plagiarism check, because paraphrasing, no matter how well you do it, often tends to get picked up by plagiarism software. So make sure that you do a check before you submit the final version. So coming to the citation part, so when you put a citation, you need a few things which will take the reader to the original source. So what do you need in a reference? I'm not sure how many people are actually listening in, but please do. Sorry. Please do, given your inputs, you can put it on your chat box or you can unmute yourself. So any of the PGs, what do you need in a reference? Anybody? So when you write a reference, what all things do you require? So for example, if you are citing a journal reference, what things would you include in the reference? Everybody seems to be sleeping. Anybody? Any of the PGs? Okay. Maybe we should start calling out names if there are no volunteers. Anybody? So what are the things you need in a reference? Okay. So first, of course, you need the name of the author or authors. If it's a group, the group bar editor. For example, some textbooks might not have individual editors or individual authors for chapters, so there you need to editor. The title of the article or the chapter, name of the journal, book or web page, volume, page number, edition, depending on what kind of material it is, date of publication, and for textbooks, in addition, you need the publisher, the place of publication. For web page, you also need to put in the citation date. Now, when you put in your references, there are different referencing styles used. Some of the common styles which people talk about, one is Chicago, you have Harvard, you have APA, American Psychological Association, APA, Modern Languages Association, which is called MLA, and something called Vancouver. Now, in medical sciences, probably the most common thing which everybody uses nowadays is Vancouver. And maybe in some journals, especially related to things like medical education, psychology and all, the Harvard style is still used. To put it briefly, Vancouver is basically a number-based referencing system, which means that any reference that you put in a number for that reference, and that has to be numerically arranged. So reference number 1, wherever you put that reference again, will be put in as number 1, followed by number 2, number 3, and so on. And that 1, 2, 3, 4 will be reflected in the bibliography also. So when you see a few examples, that will be clearer. So here, this is a Vancouver style. So references are inserted in Arabic numerals within the main text. If the reference is repeated, you use the same number again. And in the end, the reference list is in numerical order, according to the order of appearance in the main text. So for example, this is short paragraph. So this is the first reference. So that's why this has been numbered as 1. Okay. Now, when this same reference is quoted again, it will have the same number. So again 1, and which is 1, you go down, you'll find that 1 is this. Details are over here. Okay. The second reference which is quoted in the text will be number 2, which is over here. And third reference will be number 3, and so on. Now, if number 2 is quoted again somewhere, it will again carry the same number, number 2. Number 3 is quoted again, carry the same number 3 again, and so on. Okay. Now, the exact format in how you put these numbers can vary according to the journal, according to the specific instructions for a particular thesis and so on. But you can use superscript in bracket, you can use superscript without bracket, you can use just in bracket without superscript and so on. But ultimately, the important thing is that it is numerical. Okay. This basically is the Vancouver style, which is the most common thing which we will use in general in the context of health sciences. And this is what has been prescribed for your thesis also by the KOHs. So this is the classical format in which you write the reference at the end in the bibliography. So like we said, we need a few things over there. So number 1 is you need the list of authors. Now remember that when you put the name of the authors in the bibliography, it is always as surname followed by the first or middle names as initials. For example, this author is Dr. Chandar Grover. So it becomes Grover C. So surname first, which is Grover, followed by the first name as initials. If there's a first name and a middle name, both of them will come as initials only, and the surname is put first. Okay. So first is the author or list of authors. The second is the name of the article itself. So this is the name of the article in complete format. The third is the name of the journal. By default, when we use Vancouver style, we use an abbreviated form for the journal. Where do you get these abbreviations? We'll come to a bit later on. So name of the journal, followed by the year of publication, the volume, and the page number or page numbers if there is more than one page. Okay. This is how the reference is written in the end in the bibliography. So just going back once again. So Vancouver style basically is numerical. So whenever you put a reference, first reference is 1, second reference is 2, 3, and so on, and that will be reflected in the bibliography below. Whenever you repeat a reference, it carries the same number. So if 1 is repeated, it will always be 1, and so on. When you write the bibliography at the end, the list of authors with the surname coming first and the first name or middle name as initials, the full text, the full title of the article, the journal name, year, volume, page. Okay. Now, for any journal indexed in Medline or PubMed Central, it's very easy to find the journal abbreviation. So you just go to the NLM catalog in PubMed, and there you put in the name of the journal, and you will get the abbreviation over there. So here, for example, you can see the NLM title abbreviation for the Indian Dermatology online journal. So you can search for any journal and you can get the abbreviation over there. So that's one place where you can check for the abbreviation which needs to be used in the reference format. Now, details regarding each type of citation. So how you do it when it's a journal article, how you do it when it's a textbook, when it's a website, if it's ahead of print, all these are available in PubMed. There is actually a whole PDF of this book called Citing Medicine, which gives a very, very detailed explanation of this. This is actually freely available. You just go to PubMed and search for Citing Medicine. The most common type of Vancouver. So Vancouver is, in general, it's a numerical system of reference, but there are different subtypes of Vancouver. So one is called the ICMG format, which is also used in PubMed. And then there's something called the AMA style. There are only minor differences between these two, but if you want to go into details regarding these, you can check this also. It's called the AMA Manual of Style. This book, unfortunately, is not free, but I do have a PDF. So if anybody is interested, please do drop in a mail and share my email at the end, and I can share it with you. Okay, now, if you want to finish off your work quickly, there are a few shortcuts. One, of course, is to use reference manager, which we'll come to again. But a simple thing, if your number of references are not too many, is go to PubMed. When you click on an article, you have this little button on the side which says cite. So you click that, and it gives you a reference detail in any format that you choose. So, for example, here it's in the AMA format, and you can just copy and paste into your bibliography, or you can download it in the reference manager format, and that can also be used. This is one simple thing which you can do when the number of references are not too many, because with thesis this may not work because you have many references. Howard's style, not very relevant to us, but just to show you the difference, that here it is not numerical. So here, for example, anything which is cited with the name of the author. If there are two authors, we put both names. If there are more than that, we put et al., which means and others. For example, here it's Siemens et al. Now, where is the Siemens et al. In the bibliography? That comes alphabetically. Okay. So the bibliography in Howard is arranged alphabetically. So, for example, here, the first one here is Amin et al. And Amin comes first because it is alphabetical. Okay. So it is not numerical. It is written in the form of the author name and the year of publication. And the bibliography in the end is arranged alphabetically. That is the Howard style. Now, just another example. So we have the name of the author. We have the article title. We have the full name of the journal. We have the year of publication. We have volume. We have issue. We have page. Some journals, they include the issue also as part of the references. Some don't. But in general, in Vancouver, you can do both. You can put it with or without the issue number. So this is how it will be written. So again, like we said, surname will come first, followed by the first name as initial. So F. The full title as such. This abbreviation, like we said, you can just go to the NLM catalog and you'll get the abbreviation used for the journal. This is year, followed by volume. In this case, the issue has been put in bracket, followed by page numbers. Okay. So it's quite simple. Now, the other question is that, some of the articles you may find will have multiple authors. Some may go up to even, 20, 30, or even 100 authors. So what do you do over there? So in general, most publications, they use 6 authors followed by the et al. Phrase. Okay. Some use 3 authors and then et al. So that varies according to the type of journal and the specification given by them. But in general, the point is that you don't need to put all authors' names. So you put the number of authors as prescribed by the particular journal or by the university, followed by et al. Chapter in a book. Now, when you write a thesis, yes, you may need a few references which are chapters in books, but in general, try to stick with journal references, and that too, which are relevant and relatively recent. But in case you need to put in a chapter in a book, it depends a bit on whether the book has individual chapters authored by different authors, or that is not the case and it's a single editor who's written the whole thing. But if it's chapter in a book, it is the authors of the chapter, followed by the title of the chapter, followed by this thing called in, followed by editors, again in the format of surname first, followed by initials. The title of the textbook itself, place of publication, publisher, year, page. I won't go into detail, but just telling you that it's slightly different when we talk of chapter in a book or a book without individual chapters. Similarly, you can go to the resource we talked about earlier called Citing Medicine, which is available freely on PubMed, and that will give you details on how to cite things like journal article on the internet, a website, and so on. Some general tips. When you cite, you can cite review articles, but always look for the original reference within the review article. For example, in review article, it might say a lot of things and they will have put their references for that particular statement. So go to the original source, don't cite the review article itself as the original source. Stick to quality over quantity. Now, this was something which we probably did not do much during our time. So we used to have very long list of references, some of them not really that relevant. So suggestions that always stick to quality over quantity. So make sure your references are focused, they're relevant, they're recent. You don't unnecessarily need to add a lot of references for the sake of adding. Avoid things which cannot be really verified that well, like conference abstracts and personal communications. Verify citations. For example, sometimes you might get a cross citation from a review article, but if you don't go to the original one, later on you might find that that original reference was retracted for some reason. So always verify the original citations. Practice citation styles, and reference managing software is very useful. So try to play around with a few of them and see what works for you. That really makes your life easier. Just a word regarding images. So often we need illustrative images in our thesis. And remember that image also has the same principle. So even for an image, you need to cite the original copyright owner. Even if you are adapting the image, which means you're modifying the image, you're changing it a bit, you still need to cite the original copyright owner. And in many cases, you may need to take permission from the original copyright owner. So it's not enough to cite. Okay. So basically, when you get an image, you need to go to the image, see what the permissions are, what is required exactly, and do accordingly. So if you need permission, you need to go take permission from the copyright owner, which might be either the publisher or the author. Or if they say that it's enough to cite, you can do that, but you need to do that. You need to actually cite the original author of the image. There are a lot of images available under what we call Creative Commons. So there is a site called Creative Commons where you can search for images. There, many images are completely free to use without any citations. Some images require citations, but most of them they don't have the hassle of copyright issues. So you won't lose time asking for permission and all those things. Just try out the site if you're looking for any illustrative images. So just quickly, if you have time. So what do you think? Is this Vancouver or Howard? Again, if the PGs are listening in. So what do you think? What is this format, Vancouver or Howard? Okay, good. So that should be very simple. So you can see that it's numerical. It starts off with number 1 over here. Then you have number 2 coming next. Number 1 is repeated, so that comes again. Then you have number 3, number 4, and that is again reflected in the bibliography at the end. Okay, so that should be very simple to understand. That's Vancouver. What about this one? So Vancouver or Howard? Yes, Anju. It should also be easier. So Vancouver or Howard. So here it is not numerical. So you have the author name followed by year, and in the end, it is arranged alphabetically. So aardvark comes before AEF and so on. So this is Howard. Okay. Yeah, good. Okay. What about this one? This is a bibliography part. So the format is what? Vancouver or Howard? Yeah. So this is the next one. So Ashit, Anju, or anybody else? So you can see that it's in the form of author, names, followed by the title of the article, followed by the journal name in the abbreviated format, followed by year, volume, issue, page. So this is the classical way in which you write good. Yeah, you write the Vancouver reference. Good. Okay. What about this one? This is again bibliography part. So in the reference format, what do you think? We didn't discuss this in detail over there, but this is the Howard format. Okay. Slight differences as compared to Vancouver. The year comes slightly before, and the format of writing is a bit different, where you place the punctuation and so on. This is the Howard format. But then remember that for your thesis purposes, it's always the Vancouver format. So it's good to be aware of Howard, but not that important at this stage. Okay, now in this case, there are a few errors, there are a few mistakes. So what is the mistake? What is the problem with this? Let's see if anybody can find it out. Anju, Ashwati, Ashrat, anybody? So question is, what are the problems with this particular paragraph and the way the references have been cited? Okay, new opinion? Good. So one of the problems we often see when your theses are submitted to the scientific research committee or the ethics committee is that references, the styles are mixed up, so they're not consistent. So remember that you need to stick to a particular reference format, and by default for the thesis for you it's Vancouver. Okay. So here the issue is that the reference styles are mixed up. So here you have the Howard system. The rest of the places it's Vancouver, but the Vancouver itself, partly it's superscript, partly it's not in superscript, and it's all mixed up. So remember that when you write your citations and references, stick to a format, be consistent. Don't mix it up. That was over here. Okay, now what is missing over here? So this is Vancouver style, and something is missing. So what is missing? Anyone? We said that it should include the author or authors' names. It should include the title of the article. It should include the journal name in the NLM abbreviation format. So what is missing over here? Anybody? Yeah. So journal is here. So journal actually is this thing, the Australian Family Physician Journal. So that is there, and it's in the NLM abbreviation format. But there is something else which is missing. So what is it? Something between over here. Yeah, so edition would be important in the context of a textbook. But here it's a journal article. So the journal is Australian Family Physician. So in a journal, one thing you need to include before you mention the page number is the volume. Okay, good. So 2015 would be followed by the volume, then the page number. Okay. So that's what is missing over here. Okay. And what is missing over here? So here it's a textbook chapter. So we said that textbook chapters, you might need to put in a few textbook chapters as references in your thesis. But in general, as far as possible, try to stick to journal references that too, which are relevant and relatively recent, but you will often need textbook references. So here it's a textbook reference, but what is missing? So this is a chapter in textbook. So it starts off with the author of the chapter, the title of the chapter, followed by this followed by the editors of the book, followed by the name of the book, the edition relevant, followed by the place of publication, the publisher. Is something missing? Yes, the chapter, we don't put the chapter number, we put the name of the chapter. That is this thing. So the airway management is the chapter. So author is Alto Billy, chapter is airway management. These are the editors, Emerick, Stoller, Hewer, etc. That's why it's put as editors. And then the name of the textbook itself, which is Egan's Fundamentals of Respiratory Care, edition, place of publication, publisher. Something missing over here before the page. So what you are missing over there is the year of publication. Okay. So again, very, very small things, you're good, Ashwati. So it was a year. Okay. Now, just a couple of words regarding reference manager. Reference manager, probably that needs a workshop in itself on how to use it. But what I would tell you at this stage is that try to use it, because a lot of these reference managers are available free to use, at least not the basic versions. And they really make your life easy when you're writing a huge work like a thesis, because it will always have a lot of references. So it can collect references, it can store references, it can organize it, and very importantly, it can change references, the order and the style at a single click. So one of the problems when you write a thesis is that you've written the whole review of literature. It's got 50 references or 100 references. You give it to your guide. The guide says that, okay, this needs to be cut. This needs to be cut. Part of the review of literature is edited. Now the problem is the reference orders need to be changed. If you're doing it manually, it's going to be a big, difficult task. While if you've used a reference manager, you can just do it with a single click. The bibliography is automatically rearranged. It's very easy. So try to use reference managers. Now, which one to use? You have a lot of options. Simplest thing to add citations is MS Word itself. So if you're using Word, that itself as an option. But of course, it has limited functionality as compared to the dedicated reference managers. Most common ones which we use are EndNote, which is the gold standard, so to speak. You have Zotero, Mentally, RefWorks, Bibliotex, a lot of ones. And the choice is really a personal choice. It depends on how easy you find to use it, whether it's paid versus free, how much space you require, compatibility, Mac versus Windows, functions available, and so on. Personal opinion is that for thesis, any of the free versions work really well. So give one of these a try. I personally use EndNote, but for a free thing, Mendeley, I think, is a very user-friendly thing which you can try out. EndNote has, I think, a bit more of functionalities as compared to the others, but of course, I'm talking about the paid version. So you can collect group references, you can share references with other people who are working on the same project. You have a lot of styles which you can interchange with a single click. So for example, you send your work to a journal which prescribes a certain format. It gets rejected from there, unfortunately. Now you need to rework it in the new format. If you do it manually, it's going to take a lot of time. But in EndNote, single click, you can just get all the references reformatted in the new journal's specification. So it makes things very easy. Okay. And all of these reference managers, they have in-citation tools which can be linked to Microsoft Word. So you can just with a single click, you can incorporate the citations into Word, and you can populate a bibliography at the end. So this is Mendeley, which is, again, you have a free version, you have a paid version, but for practical purposes, the free version works good enough. So just to show you, So the sentence I've written is on microscopy is a useful tool. Now I need to put in my citation over there. So these are these things which I've collected in mentally already. So I just click on this citation. I choose the style, which there's a lot of styles available. So this particular style which I've chosen is Indian Journal of Dermatology, Neurology and Leprosy, which is IJDVL. So automatically it generates the bibliography in that format. Okay. Now, if you delete one reference among a list, automatically it renumbers and it changes the in-text citations also. If you send it to another journal, you can just change the style over them. So it's all very easy. It's very intuitive. So please do try it out. And finally, like we said, right now, since the thesis is the main thing we're talking about, KOHS guidelines basically just says Vancouver style. So you don't need to nitpick between the specific differences between the different styles, but I would suggest just stick to the ICMGA style or the style which Medline format follows. So that's it from my side. That's my personal email. So if you have any queries, I'd be happy to help. Thank you so much. I hope it was useful. Stina madam, should we wind up or?
I think we can wind up. There are no queries. Sabina madam.
Yes.
So, thank you, Dr. Firoz. It was an excellent talk. Now we come to this end of the session of. Thank you all and good night.